Today we are going to debunk some stabilization myths. We'll take an unemotional, unbiased, unsponsored look at the different stabilization systems so you can understand which camera to use at any point in time. Stewart here, back from our first trip to Scotland in 18 months. We made it up to the Pointy Mountain for some droning. It was dead exciting. Stay tuned for that. Now, today we are not talking about brand loyalty. There's no fanboy action going on here. I just want to give you a technical insight into how different stabilization systems work. There's a ton of myths out there on YouTube, in particular, a ton of misinformation. We're not in the market for a brand deal with Apple. We're not in the market for a brand deal with GoPro. I just want to give you objective information. At this point in time, GoPro's electronic image stabilization, called Hypersmooth, is probably the best in class, and it certainly knocks the socks off any kind of optical image stabilization we will get in a smartphone, be it optically stabilized sensors or optically stabilized lenses. We'll get into that in a second, but there are still strong reasons why you might want to use an optical image stabilization system, because the GoPro does have one big drawback. First things first, let's roll the tests and we'll show you just what's at stake here when we're talking about stabilization. So as you can see, we've got an iPhone 11 on the left and a GoPro 8 on the right. Don't worry that they're not the most up-to-date models. It really doesn't matter for the purposes of this test, as you will see. Starting with some minor shake, you can see the GoPro with Hypersmooth on is performing beautifully, and already you can see lots of vibrations there in the iPhone footage. If we step things up to some medium shake, you can see that the GoPro is still doing a pretty great job, but the iPhone footage is toast. It cannot handle this level of vibration. Now we have some major shake. The iPhone stabilization system has given up, but the GoPro is still hanging in there. The results are absolutely incredible. Look what I'm doing with the cameras here. I mean, this is crazy, but the Hypersmooth with boost on is actually handling that level of vibration, and of course, the iPhone can't. So why is the GoPro stabilization so much better than the iPhones? Well, they have two completely different approaches to stabilizing the footage. They both start from the same place, however, an internal measurement unit, which is a combination of a gyroscope and an accelerometer. It's a tiny little device on the circuit boards in here with a little moving element that gives positioning data, so the devices know where they are at any point in time. Now, the GoPro takes that data and electronically stabilizes the footage by realigning every single frame with a view to minimizing the vibrations of the camera itself. And it does an incredible result because it's a post-production effect essentially that takes place inside the camera of the GoPro, and you can get really, really precise results. If needs be, turn up the level of stabilization, crop in a little bit further to give some more room for maneuver for realigning those frames. That's why we get those incredible results. Now, by comparison, the iPhone takes that same gyroscope and accelerometer data, but it attempts to physically move either the lens inside the phone or the sensor. It's a physical process reacting to that data coming from the internal measurement unit, which by definition cannot be as effective as electronic stabilization. If you move the phone like that, you can't physically move a sensor or a lens enough to counteract that level of vibration, and that is why we see better results with the GoPro. Just in case you're wondering if the outcome would be any different using the GoPro 10 and the iPhone 13 Pro, the latest and the greatest, the answer would be no. Both of those devices might perform slightly better, but the disparity between the two would still be enormous because we're dealing with two completely different stabilization technologies. So here we have a virtually indestructible action camera with no moving parts in there and bonkers good stabilization. Why doesn't every single camera employ that technology? Well, unfortunately, there is no such thing as a free lunch, and the catch here is that we need a fast shutter speed to give us nice crispy frames with no motion blur that the software can then use to realign in post or in the camera itself. As I say, no motion blur, and if you want that cinematic motion blur, which we love, you're going to want to slap an ND filter on there, and that's going to create a problem. Slower shutter speeds, let's say 1/50th of a second for your 25 frames per second real-time footage, with the Hypersmooth switched on, do not work. The footage goes all mushy and blurry. It relies on that fast shutter speed with no motion blur. It's up to you to decide whether that matters to you or not. And if it does matter, you can look at the likes of an iPhone, stick an ND filter on there, get your shutter speed down, and enjoy that nice cinematic motion blur. The flip side is you're not going to get that crazy good stabilization that you get with the GoPro. I really want you to understand this because I'm not trying to advocate either system. I just want to show you there's different tools for different jobs, and there's so much misunderstanding and misinformation, quite frankly, especially on YouTube about this. One of the knock-on effects is that the GoPro stabilization system does not work well in low light. How many times have you seen people testing these cameras in some dimly lit forest with the stabilization on going, oh, it doesn't work that well? And the reason for that is if you have auto settings on this, the camera is going to shoot the ISO up to try and give the camera a faster shutter speed to give the stabilization a chance of working. If the stabilization does work, the picture is going to look rubbish because the ISO has just gone up and introduced a whole bunch of noise into the image. So your understanding of how these cameras work dramatically affects the results that you're going to get. Will we see electronic image stabilization work with motion blurred footage anytime soon? I'm not sure. I hope it does at some point, probably will, but at the moment it doesn't look likely. The latest development in the EIS world, which I think is very interesting, was the Sony a7S III. Super expensive camera, beautiful camera, but it's got this massive full frame sensor. Bigger the sensor, the harder it is to stabilize. So that camera has in-body stabilization. It tries to move that sensor to compensate for vibrations in the camera, but you also have the option of switching all of that off, shooting your video at high shutter speed, then taking it into their proprietary software called Catalyst Browse and stabilizing in post. You can control the amount of stabilization and take advantage of all that beautiful gyroscopically stabilized footage, and it seems to work very, very well. The flip side though is that you don't get any motion blur, so if you can add it in post, and it's an enormous kind of workflow that takes time and so on and so forth. You see, there's a lot of processing power required to handle electronic image stabilization. GoPro managed to do it in their camera. Insta360 didn't. That gives you some kind of indication of what's involved. If you want the best EIS out of an Insta360 1R, you have to do it in post. DJI managed it with their Osmo action, so it can be done, but I think that's one of the reasons why GoPro aren't just coming out with a brand new camera with a nice big 1-inch sensor, because they have to migrate that hypersmooth system to a bigger sensor. It takes longer to read all that data. The GoPro 10 just came out with a GP2 chip. Maybe it has the potential, we'll see, but they certainly didn't give us a bigger sensor for the Hero 10. In conclusion, if you want mind-blowing stabilization straight out the camera and aren't that bothered about motion blur, then use something like a GoPro. If not, you can use an iPhone. Now keep in mind, you can then fix more mechanical stabilization to an iPhone in the form of a gimbal. We did a comparison of handheld iPhone versus gimbal stabilized iPhone, and you can get some amazing results combining the optical stabilization of the iPhone with the mechanical stabilization of the gimbal. So there's a lot of ways of doing things, and it all depends on what your goals are, but with a little bit of information, hopefully you can make the right purchasing choice. Let's leave it at that for now. We have lots more content coming soon. It's good to be back, and we will see you next time.